Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. Unfortunately, it was like his illegal shutting down of Parliament. Null, of no effect, and should be quashed. In the words of the Supreme Court. This, Mr. Speaker, was 10 minutes of bluster from a dangerous Prime Minister who thinks he is above the law. But in truth, Mr. Speaker, is not fit for the office which he holds. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see so many colleagues back here doing what they were elected to do, holding the government to account for its failings. Whether it's the attempts to shut down democracy, its sham Brexit negotiations, its chaotic and inadequate no-deal preparations, its allegations of corruption, its failure on climate change, its failure to step in to save Thomas Cook, this government, Mr. Speaker, is failing the people of Britain, and the people of Britain know it.
Order! I said that the Prime Minister shouldn't be shouted down. The same goes for the Leader of the Opposition. And let me say to people bellowing from a sedentary position, stop it. You will exhaust your vocal cords. You will get nowhere. It won't work. And these proceedings will continue for as long as is necessary for the Chair to be satisfied that proper scrutiny has taken place. It is as simple and incontrovertible as that. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's Supreme Court verdict represents an extraordinary and, I believe, precarious moment in this country's history. The highest court in this land has found the Prime Minister broke the law when he tried to to shut down our democratic accountability at a crucial moment in our public life. The judges concluded there was no reason, and I quote, let alone a good reason, for the Prime Minister to have shut down Parliament. After yesterday's ruling, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister should have done and resigned. Mr. Speaker, here he is, forced back to this House to rightfully face the scrutiny he tried to avoid. With no shred of remorse or humility, and, of course, no substance whatsoever. That's right. So let's see if he will answer some questions.
He won't. He won't.
Does the Prime Minister agree with his Attorney General
write it down, Boris,
that the government got it wrong, or with the Leader of the House that the Supreme Court committed a constitutional coup? This, Mr. Speaker, is a vital question about whether the government respects the judiciary or not. The Attorney General was also categorical that the government would comply with the EU Withdrawal No. 2 Act. Can the Prime Minister confirm that? Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to those MPs from all parties across the House, the Lords and in the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, who have not only fought so hard to stop a disastrous no deal, but continued to take the case against prorogation through the courts. The government has failed to silence our democracy. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, during the period of unlawful prorogation, the government was forced to release their Yellowhammer no-deal analysis and plans. No wonder the Prime Minister has been so eager to avoid scrutiny and so eager to hide the dangers of his Brexit plan. The release of those documents leads to many questions the government must now answer that our Parliament is back in operation. So I would like to start by asking the Prime Minister why Mr. Speaker, by asking the Prime Minister why the government described leaked Yellowhammer documents in August as being out of date. When the documents were later produced in September, they were word for word the same documents. It is clear they have tried to hide from the people the truth, the real truth of a no-deal Brexit, and tried to hide the fact that their policy would heap misery on the people of this country. Let's just take a look at the analysis. Chaos at Britain's ports with months of disruption. People going short of fuel and fresh foods.
Your paper?
It's your paper, you wrote it, you tried to hide it. I beg your pardon, Mr. Speaker, I don't hold you responsible for writing the document. Disruption of people's vital medical supplies. Rises in energy prices for every household in the whole country. A hard border for the people of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Most damning of all, Mr. Speaker, is the passage that simply says, and I quote, "Low-income groups will be disproportionately affected." Well, there we have it, Mr. Speaker. A simple warning, a simple truth, that a Tory government is continuing to follow a policy they will know will hit the poorest people in our country the hardest. They simply do not care. Mr. Speaker, the damning document we have already seen is only 6 pages long. It's only right that this House should expect more transparency from this government. The government says they're doing all they can to get a deal before October the 31st. But the truth, Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister has hardly put any effort into negotiations, any progress at all, looks at its most generous best to be minimal. Only yesterday, the European Union's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said that there was no reason today for optimism. Can I ask the Prime Minister why he believes Mr. Barnier has that view? This House is still yet to hear any detail of any deal the government seeks to negotiate. We're told the government has distributed papers to Brussels outlining proposals for a change to the backstop. Will the Prime Minister publish these papers and allow them to be debated in this House of Parliament? For this government to have any credibility with our people, they need to show they have an actual plan. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also has questions to answer about his conduct in public office. And in particular, allegations that he failed to declare an interest in the allocation of public money to a close friend whilst he was Mayor of London. It was announced today that the Department of Culture, Media and Sport is reviewing the funds allocated in the light of the Sunday Times report. Did the Prime Minister initiate that review? Will the Prime Minister fully cooperate with the DCMS review and that of the Greater London Assembly? Will he refer himself to the Cabinet Secretary for investigation? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, no Prime Minister, is not above the law. Mr. Speaker, no one can trust this Prime Minister, not on Iran, not on Thomas Cook, not on climate change, not on Brexit.
Iran, yes, on Iran.
For the good of this country, Mr. Speaker,
Order. The Leader of the Opposition is entitled to be heard in this Parliament. Order. And he will be heard. I don't mind how long it takes. These exchanges will take place in an orderly manner. Be in no doubt about that. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite simply, for the good of this country, he should go. Mr. Speaker, he says he wants a general election. I want a general election. It's very simple. If he wants an election, get an extension and let's have an election.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman asked several questions. I'll try and deal with them in order. On the first point, my friend the Attorney General made absolutely clear, of course, that this is a judgment with which he disagreed. Though, of course, we respect the judgment of the Supreme Court. On the second point, are we about the Ben Burt Act? I will say what I'm sure he understands. We will, of course, obey the law, and we will come out of the EU on October the 31st. On his point about preparations for a no-deal Brexit, I congratulate my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who just spoke for 2 hours on this matter. Our preparations are very far advanced, and I think this country can be entirely confident that we will be ready, deal or no deal. On his point about whether we are on the verge of getting a deal or not, well, it is absolutely true that negotiations are difficult, but we are making progress. And all I will say to him and to his friends is that they have not been made easier by the Surrender Act that he passed. And I am very proud, by the way, to take his next point, about everything that I did as Mayor of London. I may say to the current Mayor that he'd be better off spending less on press officers and more on police officers in London, because we were funding 20,000 more on our streets. And as for being trusted on Iran, Mr. Speaker, this is a man who took the shilling of the mullahs from Press TV. Mr. Speaker, I think there's something. I was rather sad, actually, in a way, that the Labour conference was interrupted by the ruling, because I was awestruck by some of the things I heard, doubtless designed to obscure the inanity of his policy over Brexit. He wants to abolish fee-paying schools at a cost of £7 billion to the taxpayer. He wants a 4-day working week, cutting the incomes of the lowest paid in this country. He wants to abolish Ofsted, and now we hear he wants to abolish all immigration controls from the EU. But there was a crucial passage missing from his speech, it turns out, Mr. Speaker. I think there's something slightly pitiful, in a way, about the Right Honourable Gentleman. It seems that he actually did want to call an election now, Mr. Speaker. There was a passage in his speech calling for an election now, but it was censored by the Stasi in the form of the Shadow Chancellor. Or possibly it was the Shadow Lord Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman is being gagged. He's being muzzled. He's being held captive by his colleagues. They won't let him say what he wants to say. I say, free the Islington One, Mr. Speaker. And why won't they allow him to have an election, Mr. Speaker? Why won't they allow him to unleash his charms on the electorate? It's because they're not only terrified that he's going to lose, but also even more terrified by the remote possibility that he might win. He can't control his own party. He can't decide whether he's for Leave or for Remain. He's being held captive by his colleagues. The electorate are being held captive by this zombie parliament and this zombie opposition, and he wants the entire country to be held captive in the EU after October the 31st at a cost of more than £1 billion a month. We say no. I say no. Let's get Brexit done and let's take this country forward. Yeah.